Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Transform with Travel podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Tolliday. I am the founder of Transform with Travel. And today is a very interesting episode. It's very data driven. One of the most searched topics in Google at this specific time of year. And I'm literally recording this pre-election, so I don't know what has happened. But no matter which way you swing, we are coming at you live with the most searched topic that happens historically. Every 4 years, this happens historically. People search, how do I leave the US? How do I move to XYZ country? How do I fill in the blank, right? Portugal, Italy, Thailand, Costa Rica, you name it. No matter which way the election goes, people are searching for it. And it's interesting because when we were looking at property earlier this year, land down in Costa Rica, I was mentioning, we would really love to buy property before the election because I know that there's a big upswing in interest after the election, after any election. And the real estate agent goes, "Oh, we love election season because we get flooded with emails from people searching for land or finding ways, because Costa Rica is a relatively easy country to buy land, have the full rights for, become permanent residents." So all of this to say, this is why we specifically wanted this episode to come right after the election, because no matter which way you swing, someone, 50%, is not going to be happy with the outcome. And we know that people are looking for ways to find a life outside of the US. And even if this your reason for wanting to leave, wanting to move outside of the US is not based on what happens on the election, you had this desire well before we got to this stage as a country. It's just things, very, very helpful things to note and to consider, no matter why you're leaving, no matter where you're leaving to. This conversation today is about the legal and tax implications for moving out of the US. And not even so much like moving permanently. You could go for 6 months. You could be just traveling long term through different countries. So this is not just specifically for moving. This is for anyone who is going to be spending a significant amount of time outside of the US, if the US is your home country or your permanent resident there. And if you haven't listened to the episode from last week, be sure to scroll back in your podcast app just 1 week prior, 1 episode prior, and listen to my 8 things that you need to consider before moving overseas. So these are mistakes that you do not want to make. These are things that you want to make sure that you are checking off on your checklist, that you're talking to your professional support team to make sure that you have in place before you move overseas. Make sure that you scroll back and listen to that episode. Today, I have a special guest on, Lauren Klein. She was actually the second person that I interviewed for the podcast. Her episode is episode 3, and it is called Build Wealth and Abundance for Traveling with Lauren Klein. Lauren Klein is the co-founder of Flourish Law Group, which is a law firm specializing in estate planning for the everyday family. Lauren worked with some of the highest of the high net worth clients internationally and domestically for over a decade in terms of wealth management and estate planning. And we're actually current clients of hers and her co-founder, Kristen. And it's been such an amazing experience. So I wanted to bring her on today because as my husband and I were looking for property and land to buy in Costa Rica, we realized, oh, shoot, we need to get Lauren involved in this conversation because she is our expert in how to make sure that our estate is taken care of and that we're legally covered. We had to bring her in to talk to our Costa Rican attorney and talk to our CPA who handles our business taxes and our personal taxes and eventually our international taxes. There was a lot to consider. It was a lot more than just, hey, this looks like a dream. Let's move to Costa Rica. And as someone who has moved to different countries, I've moved to Australia, I've moved to Thailand, I've had bank accounts in countries around the world, I've had assets at different countries. There's a lot to consider when deciding to move. And this conversation is not to deter anyone from making this amazing leap of faith, whether it's election-based or not. But these are things that I wish I would have known the first time I moved to a different country. Lauren is here to talk about all the ins and outs of how to legally protect yourself from an estate planning point of view, from a legal point of view, from a tax perspective as well. Taxes plays heavily in moving. Stay tuned for this amazing episode. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get to work. So happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be back, Kelly, and I love this topic. I'm excited.
Yeah. And so, for those tuning in, one of the most common, actually, the most searched thing on election day historically, or the most, I guess, biggest trend pre and post election is how do I move out of the US? And I remember speaking to a real estate agent down in Costa Rica, and he was like, oh, yeah, we love US election years because people come flooding with the requests of what's available. How do I buy property? All the things. And I was just talking to a friend 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and her dad was searching for property down in a country down in Central America. Like, how do I move? So no matter which way you swing, this is not a political episode, it's just the facts. I'm here today with Lauren Klein, who is an estate planning attorney, and she's actually my attorney as well. So we love having conversations together. And we're going to talk about today, okay, you want to move. Okay, that's fine. You have the right to move, but legally, how should we protect ourselves, and also what are some things that we don't think about? We often romanticize this journey of just jumping ship and leaving our country into this magical foreign land, but there's a lot of step-by-step processes that you might be missing, and we want to make sure that we're covering ourselves.
Yeah, it's such an interesting and timely topic. And we were chatting before, this episode won't be legal advice, tax advice, but it will give you some really great tips and things to think about and then explore, with your estate planning professional, your CPA, because we're going to talk about estate planning and how is that impacted, if you're thinking about moving out of the States, taxes, income tax, estate and gift tax. We'll chat about that, and then asset protection for any assets that you're leaving behind. Maybe you're going to keep your home and rent it out, or you still have, of course, probably bank accounts in the US, family members. So I think we'll touch on all of those topics. But I think the biggest thing, first and foremost, is just make sure that you're informed and that you have a good team here in the US, because even if you physically are departing from this country, if you are a US citizen or if you've lived here a long time, there's a lot of different things, and we can kind of touch on each of those, but it's not so simple. It's not so simple.
Totally, totally. And before we dive into all of that, I'd love to play a little game. And when you first were on the podcast, we didn't play this game. So this is new for you. We're going to play Two Truths and a Lie Travel Edition. So are you ready to try to trick me here?
I am so ready.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. So the first one is when I went to Thailand for my honeymoon. The second we got out of the airport, we hop in a cab, immediately get in a car accident.
Oh no.
Everyone gets out of their cars. They do a nice little bow to each other, and we go on our way. And that's what happened. The next travel adventure, I was in Italy to see some tombs of some famous artists, and we were very young, and it was very new to travel, forgot to check when the cathedral would be open. So we get there, of course it's closed, and me and my two friends had to flirt with the security guard at the cathedral. And he told us we had to run and pretend like we were escaping past him and we could go look at everything. So we didn't miss it because we were in that city for only like 24 hours or something like
Okay,
that.
okay.
And then another adventure in travel, I was traveling and I lost my passport. The most dreaded situation you can ever imagine happening. And it was a whole ordeal. And I got it back, but it was really scary.
Okay. All of those things seem very plausible, but the last one, you didn't give as many details as the other one. And I feel like the more details you give, the more true it might be. But that could be reverse psychology. So I don't know. Thailand, I feel like is possible because I know Thailand, and that seems like something they would just do. The Italian one, you're very beautiful, so I can see that definitely happening, flirting with the guard and him letting you in. So I'm going to say the passport. I feel like maybe you didn't lose your passport.
You are correct.
Oh,
I
yay.
hope to God that I never lose my passport.
I
That
also
was
feel
like
like
my worst fear.
you're so organized as a person. I feel like that wouldn't happen to you. But you never know. Okay, amazing.
You're
Well,
right.
how
You
fun.
won.
Yeah, I feel like Thailand, that's just something they don't want to like get into conflict ever. So they just like don't acknowledge that we just got into a car accident.
Andrew and I are just looking at each other like, oh, okay, we're just going to keep going with our day.
No
Great.
exchange of insurance policies or anything like that. Oh my gosh.
Nothing. Just a nice bow, and everyone, went about their day.
Wow. Well, welcome, 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 Lauren. Thank you for playing along with the game and getting to know you a little bit more. So, we mentioned at the beginning, obviously, this episode is about wanting to move overseas, whether it's because of the election or not. This just happens to be timed around that, and how to legally protect yourself. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use an example of a couple who are both remote workers because that just makes life a little bit easier, I guess, in terms of the work aspect of it. But they also have young kids. And we're saying that because we both are in that situation where we have young kids and they decide that they want to leave the US and move overseas. So, as an estate planning lawyer, what is the first thing that you wish people would think about even before they think about what destination they're going to? What would you hope that they have in place before they just jump ship and move overseas? We'll get back to the show in just a moment. At the end of every episode, I always ask my guests what their favorite must have travel item is. And I want to take a quick moment to share with you one of mine, a travel companion that's just as essential as your passport: Arch Rome Right Travel Insurance. Whether you're exploring the vineyards of Italy or trekking through the Andes, travel is thrilling and transformative. But sometimes unexpected events can put a pause on our plans. That's where Arch Rome Right steps in. With a focus on specialized travel insurance solutions, they're here to assist you in navigating those unforeseen travel hiccups. I once was stuck in the middle of an island in Indonesia during a massive earthquake, and we lost personal belongings, 3 months worth of accommodation, and we racked up expenses with last minute flights and hotels. I only wish I knew about Arch Rome Right travel insurance back then. From trip cancellations and medical emergencies to lost luggage and delays, Arch Rome offers insurance plans that cover what matters most, and most importantly, gives you peace of mind. Each plan is backed by Arch Insurance's strong financial ratings and a team dedicated to exceptional customer service, recognized for their expertise and responsiveness. But what truly sets Arch Rome apart? Their innovative approach combines state of the art technology with real human experiences, providing you with transparent and swift service. Join the millions who trust Arch Rome and make your next trip a little smoother. Head to the show notes to find and use my personal affiliate link to get a quote today. Thanks to Arch Rome for supporting our show.
So the first thing I would say is whatever state you are residing before you move, get your estate planning documents in place in that jurisdiction. So typically for a family with young children, that's going to include a revocable trust. So you can put assets, retitle assets into that revocable trust, which is a type of basically a trust, a bucket, a backpack where you can put assets, but you can still change it. That's why it's called revocable. You can amend the terms, you can put assets in, take assets out. You can be the one who controls the trust. You can be the beneficiary along with your spouse and your children. But that way, if something happens to assets that you have still in the United States, you're not worried about probate. Probate is when you pass away and you own an asset in your individual name without a beneficiary named. So if you don't have it in a trust or you don't have a transfer on death, in order for that asset to get to the beneficiaries, whether named in your will or based on, if you don't have a will, based on what the laws of the state where you resided provide, then you have to hire an attorney. Typically, you have to go before a judge, your family does, and it could take years and be very expensive. And it's very easy to avoid. So, starting with that revocable trust is really, really important. Having a will to name guardians. So, one of our biggest conversations with our clients who are parents is if something, unlikely event, God forbid, something happened to you and your spouse or your partner, who would be the caretaker for your children? That's one of the number one things that as parents, we think about, and we like to have the peace of mind knowing that we've legally memorialized all of that. So thinking about, okay, is that family back in the States? Making sure you've explained in your document why you've named those people. Is it a family member maybe outside of the US or where you're moving to? Making sure that that is all documented. And then having healthcare documents. So we have clients who live overseas, but they're from Florida originally. And so we have one, for example, she lives in Africa. She's like, if something happens to me, I want to go back to the US for healthcare purposes. I need to have my documents that say who can make healthcare decisions, on my behalf, who can make legal decisions and financial decisions on my behalf. And then wherever, if you then decide where you're going to go, it would behoove you to have your US estate attorney talk to an estate attorney in that country to make sure that whatever documents you have in that country are aligned. There's no discrepancies, there's no conflicts, to make sure you're covered no matter what happens, from
Yeah.
a probate perspective and a legacy perspective.
I was just about to say, I was listening to a podcast about a woman who specializes in helping people relocate to Portugal. I believe her community is called Blacksit. And she was talking about how in Portugal, you have to have your documents signed, your state plan signed every 5 years, but in the US it's every 10 years, or it's something to do with the states. So if you don't have what's going to be legally recognized in the country you're moving to, because you think it's legally recognized in the states but it's not actually recognized in the country you're moving to, so that's very important to have both your US based attorney, but also have whatever country you're living in, that professional looking over it as well. And I think it's interesting to start this conversation with estate planning and wills and all that, because that's not the first thing that people think about when they go live their best life in Costa Rica or Portugal or or Thailand. But it's the very real reality that life happens and death happens no matter where you are. Moving to in a country isn't going to mitigate that risk at all. And it's something that helps you to have a little bit of peace of mind knowing that you have yourself covered and you have your kids covered during that time.
Yeah. And it really, I always tell people estate planning is just an extension of your financial planning. So it doesn't need to be scary and daunting, because you might live until 110 and pass away very peacefully. You still want something in place that says what happens to your assets is tax efficient for your beneficiaries, protects everybody. So it doesn't have to be doom and gloom. It's literally just making sure that we all work hard for our money, we invest. Let's make sure things are protected if we become incapacitated or pass. It really, I like to take the stigma out of it, because it doesn't need to be that scary. And my background over the years has been working with international clients, so either US individuals who have assets overseas or are moving, or international clients who are moving to the US. And there's a lot of differences between, like, Spain doesn't recognize trusts. London has a lot of funky rules if you're a resident there, with inheritance tax. So having people on your team who can make sure that you can go enjoy your life and you don't have to worry about this stuff because it's all clean and buttoned up is important.
Yeah. And you mentioned you have a client, let's say, living in South Africa, and she wants to go back to the US if she had any healthcare things pop up. That just brought something into my mind. Of course, whatever country you move into, you need to figure out their healthcare system. If you need to have a private plan, if you qualify for their public policies, their Medicare, whatever they have over there. But also, what do you do about your healthcare plan here in the US? If you end up coming back to visit family for a month, you want to make sure that you're covered if you get into a car accident or you get sick or you just have to go to urgent care. It's not cheap to come back to the US and receive healthcare here. Do you have any clients that keep their healthcare plans in the US or have some sort of like gap healthcare plans?
That particular client works for a US based company that she just happens to
Right.
be, in another jurisdiction. Usually, typically, from what I've seen for our clients who completely, they work for a company overseas or they work for themselves, they don't have insurance here. And I'm not sure what they do if they come here, temporarily. That's a very interesting question. I think it's probably a little cost prohibitive to have insurance in both places, but it's an
Yeah, that's what I
interesting
was thinking
question.
because when I was living in Australia, I had private insurance over there because I wasn't a citizen or a permanent resident at the time. So I didn't qualify for their Medicare. So I paid for private health insurance over there. It's only like $75 a month.
Oh my
And then when
gosh.
I would come back home, I believe I would get either travel insurance that allowed permanent residents coming back home. But part of that time that I was living there, I was under the age of 26, which I believe I was still under my dad's healthcare plan at the time. So it's interesting that it's just like questions to think about. Me and you, we are not healthcare specialists. We don't have the answer to that, but it's something that you as the listener considering moving or just traveling long term, now it doesn't even have to be moving, traveling long term in a different country should consider. So
Yeah,
thank you for sharing that.
definitely.
What are some of the, I guess, common mistakes from maybe a legal and tax perspective that you see people make when they move or they are living overseas for an extended period of time? We don't even need to use the word fully moving. Even if you're planning on spending 6 months in a different country or 12 months in a different area of the world, that's still under this umbrella.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest misconceptions about moving and working somewhere else is that the US won't tax you on that income. But the US has a very unique tax system. So when you're a US citizen or a green card holder, or you spend a certain amount of time, you've spent a certain amount of time in the last few years in the States, even if you're not a citizen or a green card holder, you are taxed on your worldwide income from a US income tax perspective. So let's say you're moving overseas, you're working for a company, the US will still tax those funds. Now, depending on what country it is, there might be a treaty that allows for, certain credits or reductions. The Internal Revenue Code also provides credits. So you're not necessarily going to be paying double tax, but you still need to file in the US. You need to claim that income, you need to show what you earned, and then you need a qualified CPA to then put in those foreign tax credits to make sure that you are reporting everything properly. It may not be exactly wiped out. It depends on, you're working with two different jurisdictions. And so you probably also need to pay tax there. So you need to have a good tax professional wherever you are living and working. Another thing to think about is if you have, foreign bank accounts or other foreign assets, foreign companies, there's reporting requirements. So there's an FBAR requirement, and the dollar amount's fairly low for a bank account, in that foreign jurisdiction. But even beyond that, there's forms that you have to show what companies you have. And if you don't file these forms, the penalties are very substantial. So before I started practicing law, the big thing was people would put money in Switzerland in Swiss banks. And then there was a whole big case with UBS where basically everything got blown up. Like people became aware of these accounts. And so for many years in the beginning of my law practice, I was helping people who were US who had foreign assets clean up their reporting. And sometimes the penalties and interest were in the millions for
Whoa.
people, or even for people who we call them accidental US citizens. Let's say they were born here, but then they moved back to wherever, their family was from when they were 2. They didn't even know they're US citizens. Technically, they still have worldwide, income and also reporting requirements. So just making sure that, kind of going back to that, like first thing I said, that you have a team who understands all of this, because you don't want to try to do this. Is not a situation where you want to DIY,
Yeah.
because the risks are it's just too great.
Yeah.
The risks are too great.
Yeah, I appreciate that statement because I lived in Australia for 5 years, and my first year I was right out of college. So one, you don't understand anything about
Yeah,
taxes
no,
because you
yeah,
learn, geometry, but you have no idea how taxes work. And I didn't realize I had to file US taxes, even though I made no US money that year. I made fully in Australia, all of my income in Australian dollars into an Australian bank account. And then I met with a specialist who specializes in US American expats in Australia filing their US taxes. And just like you said, because Australia has an agreement with the US that I can prove that I made Australian income, that I got taxed Australian tax, that I'm not going to get taxed US as well because of that income, but I still had to file my report and I had to file my FBAR, which proved that I had a foreign bank account that reached a certain threshold of US dollars. So I think right now it's 10,000 US dollars in any account in any given time. So it's not just like one account. Like if you had 5 bank accounts and you tried to shuffle your money around, not going to work. And then at the time, they were just creating a new rule that if you were a US citizen trying to open up an Australian bank account because you were living there, some banks literally wouldn't take you because they didn't want to deal with the US system of filing with the IRS. That's how intense it was. So, yeah, like you said, it's just super important to remember you have to file your taxes every year. You need to make sure, even if you're not making US income, working with a specialist both in that country that you're living in. What's really interesting right now, and Lauren, I don't know if you have experience with this with clients, But a remote worker working in a different country, but like let's say a freelancer, they own their own business. They're working in another country, but they're making US income. But there's this discrepancy between, but I'm living in a different country. It's not, there's like this little la la land or like fantasy land where that money is just tax free. And it's just not true. Like you still have to file taxes. I don't know if you've come across clients who just didn't realize that because they were out of the country, they still had to file
Yeah,
their
well,
taxes.
that has definitely come up with my US clients in the past. And it's also come up with clients who are non US, but there's different rules depending on the source of income. So if you're non US, but you have US source income, then you still have to pay US income tax, even if you're maybe operating in a foreign country. So I've done projects with clients trying to plan and do an analysis. Do they have to pay US tax or not? Because the Internal Revenue Code is old. It was written before we had remote work,
Right.
true remote work and the internet. So what is US source? If you're sitting in Spain in an office, but your clients are in the US, you need someone to make sure that everything is done properly and you're reporting the right way. And none of this should be a deterrent for living your dreams. It's just good information to say, okay, I need to make sure that I have people who understand this, so I'm doing everything in the right way so you can go enjoy, living in that country.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super helpful. So, last year, my entire family went to Greece to celebrate my parents' 60th birthdays. We were so excited to explore this beautiful country together, but we had no idea where to start when it came to planning. With hundreds of islands to choose from, we knew we needed to work with an expert to ensure it would be the trip of a lifetime, catering to every family member's needs. That's where EO Retreats came in. Working with Katrina, founder of EO Retreats, was an absolute dream, and she made our big, fat Greek family holiday a huge success. EO Retreats is a boutique retreat and travel company specializing in creating one-of-a-kind retreats and custom travel itineraries that will allow you to transform when you travel and be left with memories that will last a lifetime, which we love here at the podcast. Katrina was on the podcast last year where she dove into her story of moving to Greece and embracing the slow living culture. Check out episode 6 to learn more about her move to Greece, and her company EO Retreats. She's inspired people from around the world to make a change in their lives, and she's launching her new course, How to Move to Greece, to help support you in your dreams of moving to Greece as well. Whether you're looking to travel, retreat, or move to Greece, EO Retreats has you covered. Head to eoretreats.com, that's EYIA retreats.com, and learn more about their upcoming group travel and retreats to Greece, their customized itineraries, as well as their new course, How to Move to Greece. So let's say we kind of talked a bit about the tax situation, making sure that you're paying your US taxes. You also potentially might, if you're earning money in that specific country, you also might have to pay taxes in that country. So just getting very clear about the tax situation. Another thing to think about is, so let's say you owned your home in the US and you now want to move to Panama, or you want to move to Portugal or Spain, but they want to keep their home so that they can rent it. And if they're lucky enough that they get to keep their home, they can rent it. Seems like a great source of income while you're living in a potentially cheaper country to live, but they want to rent their home. So from a legal aspect, what are you doing with that asset? I guess, are you putting that in your trust to start with? And then you have this liability of having people living in your home. From your perspective, what would you do in that situation?
So I think it would depend on whether they think they're going to come back to that home or not as their primary residence. If they say, this will likely never be a primary residence again, then we would explore moving it into an entity that would give them asset protection. So probably the main entity is an LLC, a limited liability company. And depending on the state where you're located, there's different rules. In Florida, when you have two owners of an LLC, you have higher asset protection than if you have a single owner. Still good to have an LLC with a single owner, but you're just creating even more asset protection if there's a slip and fall and you get sued, or if you have a creditor that has nothing to do with that property, but they still want to attach to that property from a separate lawsuit. So exploring, asset protection and thinking about the right way to do that, typically an LLC. And then if you have a revocable trust, you can have the revocable trust own that LLC. So you're still avoiding probate. You're making sure the beneficiaries are getting the assets in the way that you want them to. For our clients who have minor children or young adult children or even adult children, they want to make sure that the children just aren't receiving everything if something happens to them. So making sure that you have that trust that says how they receive the assets, how the trust is administered, who's going to be administering that trust, who's going to be the landlord, if something happens and your children can't handle it. Making sure you have the right, liability insurance on that property, personal liability insurance. Because sometimes if you have a mortgage, it's really hard to move that asset into an LLC. The bank won't let you do it. So you really need to make sure you're doing it in the right way. And if it's going to be like in Florida, we have homestead. So homestead is there's different types of homestead, but one of the most important ones is, well, two most important ones. One, there's creditor protection for our homestead properties. And also there's a cap on how much your property taxes, can go up per year. So if you think you might be returning to that home, maybe putting it in an LLC doesn't make sense, because if it's an LLC, it can't be your homestead. So just making sure that you talk through someone professional who's willing to listen to your goals and make a game plan that makes sense based on what your goals are here, and now, I think is one of the biggest keys there.
And I think what you just said is so important when you're talking to any professional in any part of your life, your healthcare team, your real estate team, your attorney team, your CPA, like any team that you have, any support that you have, what is your goal? What do you actually want out of this? Because of course there's the code and the law and the process and the standard procedure, but what for you as an individual and as a family are you looking to get out of this experience? And something that I always like to point out is there's so many ways to get creative with the goal that you have. So, Lauren, we just went through this whole process of my husband and I looking at property in Costa Rica. We were under contract down there. We talked to our Costa Rican lawyer. We talked to the Costa Rican builder. We talked to the CPA. We talked to the global team within our CPAs. We talked to every single person. And at the end of the day, we didn't end up going through with the contract because of various different reasons. I'll talk about it in a different podcast, what to look out for when buying land in Costa Rica. But it's about getting creative and knowing your options. You could move to a different country and not have to buy property over there, not have to uproot your whole life. You could just go spend 3 months as a tester. There's a program called Boundless Life, and one of the co-founders is coming on the podcast. The episode will launch in December, but they help families spend 3 months in different locations around the world by offering, they get you an apartment, they handle schooling, they have co-working spaces. I need to tell you about this. I see your brain's literally spinning. I can see you right now.
That's so cool. I
But
love
they have property, they have
it.
locations in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain now, in Bali. And so it's like just doing a little bit of research, but underneath that research, knowing your ultimate intention, because you can travel the world, you can move overseas if the US is not feeling like a supportive environment for you anymore. These things are all possible, but you need to have your team and you need to be asking yourself the right questions. So, from your professional standpoint, should be a part of your team as you make this decision.
Number one, having an estate planning attorney who also understands real estate, especially if there's going to be real estate involved, is so important. A great financial advisor will be key as well, to make sure, especially if you kind of want to leave assets here and not have to worry about them, making sure that someone is keeping a very shrewd eye on your investments and what's going on.
Yeah, I was just thinking like 401k or your IRA, like what, like that's a whole nother topic, which we won't get into right now, but financial advisor, we didn't touch on that. Like who's going to be monitoring this for you while you're living your best life overseas and probably not checking your balances every single month.
Yeah, and making sure that between either the estate planning attorney, the financial advisor, or both, they have some sort of digital vault software where you can put the information on your assets. So if something does happen, there is access to all the information, what your accounts are, so people aren't completely in the dark if something, even if you don't pass away, God forbid, but just something happens and you can't get access, making sure that you have people that you can trust and that you have a good list of your assets, including crypto and things like that. You don't want that stuff to get lost somehow in the shuffle. And then, of course, a CPA, a good CPA who understands international. There's a lot of fabulous CPAs and accountants out there, who understand domestic very, very well, but they don't necessarily understand the reporting forms and the foreign tax credits and things like that. Or even, we didn't really talk about this, but if you might want to give up your US citizenship, I mean, people do choose to do that, but there's also a lot of pitfalls if you don't do that in the right way. You have to pay potentially exit tax to leave. There was one of the people in Facebook tried to do that, and the IRS, dinged him for a lot of money because you can't just leave. The US doesn't want you to just leave the tax base. So
Of
making
course.
sure that you have that accountant CPA who really understands this stuff. And no matter what for your team, and it could also be a healthcare, specialist, a realtor, real estate attorney, if your estate planner doesn't understand that stuff. But no matter what, you want people who will collaborate and who are willing to say, I don't know the answer to that, but we will find someone who does and is willing to work with, counsel in other countries and be a team player, because you need everyone to be on the same page and have your best interests at heart. So you don't have to worry about all this stuff.
Yeah. So you would say estate planning attorney, and ideally they would also understand foreign financial advisor, a CPA who also understands international tax and all of that, how that relates and impacts your US tax, potentially a real estate attorney if you need, but also on the flip side, having that team in the other country as well that you're moving into, like having somebody talking within Facebook groups and expat groups into the city that you're moving to. Also understanding visas. You can be a remote worker, but now you have 90 days in the Schengen area in Europe. So it's like, how do we piece all of these pieces together? So all this episode isn't to deter anyone. It's just to show that there's so many layers to make sure that you protect yourself, because the last thing you want to do is go live your best life, put your head in the sand, and then be coming back home potentially, or staying in the new country with a whole slew of problems that are a lot harder to manage when you're overseas than if you just would have dealt with it step by step with your team. One thing I want to ask is, you mentioned a digital vault. Can you explain why Flourish Law Group, the law firm that you founded with your co-founder, Kristen, can you explain how that digital vault helps your clients? Because you have international clients, you have clients like me who have assets in Australia, we have potential assets in different countries. And can you explain how that digital vault helps someone like myself who does want to live a life overseas and also in the US?
This is something that we're so excited about. We're still in the beta version because we're testing it ourselves to make sure that it works well for clients. But I really think that this is the future of estate planning. So I'll give a quick example. My law partner, Kristen, for years worked for one of the big trust companies, and she was administering estates when that trust company or that bank was named as personal representative. She said one time in all the estates, and they were high net worth clients that she administered, one time someone had a list. They had a list of their assets. They had a list of who did their lawn, who did their pool, all their professionals in one spot. So that happened one time, and it was the holy grail, because usually, either in her case, she was the one going on the treasure hunt in the house, or your family members are trying to piece together your life and what you have. And with the world becoming increasingly digital, assets will get lost, truly lost. They
Mhm.
will. It's known as escheating to the estate, or to the state rather. So in Florida, you can go on treasurehunt.gov and you can see if any of your assets have become property of the state, maybe a paycheck you didn't claim when you were 15 years old. You can go on there, and other states have this as well, because things will get lost. The generation that has the paper statements, that's not the way of the future. And so having this vault where you can put in your estate planning documents, you can put in information about your assets, you can put in information, about your investment property, your LLC, your operating agreement, your EIN, all the things, basically everything in your life. And the way that this particular company that we work with, who built this for us, they started their company because it's a financial advisor and a CPA. And the CPA she was giving birth, and something happened and she almost died. And she said, she's laying there and she's like, everything in my life. And she was really like the CEO of her house. She's like, if I go, everything goes with it. My husband will be clueless about who the nanny is,
Oh,
who this and that, like
we
all the
all know that.
things,
That
all the
is a
things.
universal law.
Yes, universal law. And she came up with this business idea. And I give it 5 years. I think most law firms will have this. A lot of brokerage, financial firms already do. But we felt as a law firm for Flourish Law Group that this was really important, because we like to see because we've both been in this industry for a long time. Myself, almost 13 years, my law partner, about 10. So we've seen a lot, and we've always been interested in estates. So we always like to say, what have we seen done well and what can we do to improve. And this is one of the things that we really, really are excited about for our clients to have access to. And then what happens is if you become incapacitated or you pass away, you have named a confidant who then securely can get into it and get that information rather than being completely in the dark. So many of our probates, the clients, they have beneficiaries, they don't know. They don't know what's
Yeah.
out there. It's hard.
Just like
So
I'll just change one of my passwords to have a different symbol because it's asking me to, and I don't tell anyone that. So how the hell is anyone supposed to get into my bank account if they have to? Especially if you're living overseas. That's really powerful because let's say you get a new investment property over there, or you start a business in Spain, or whatever it is. You have a bank account over there. You're going to have a bank account in the country. I had a bank account when I lived in Thailand for 6 months. I had my own bank account. So now instead of having to fax or scan or whatever paper documents over, you can just log in to your computer from your beach in Thailand and add in your details to the digital vault, and your estate planner has that for you. And that's why Flourish Law Group for us, apart from you guys wanting to impact the regular family and be able to help every single family feel confident in their financial plan, in their life plans. I love that is that forward. You guys are so forward thinking in that and so progressive. So I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that if people were, let's say, in different states, because you practice in the state of Florida, correct?
correct. We are only licensed in the state of Florida, so we can advise on Florida issues, Florida assets, Florida residence, or federal tax. I'm
Okay.
a tax attorney, so anything federal we can advise on as well.
Okay, amazing. So if somebody was looking for, let's say, an estate planning attorney like yourself, but they're in a different state, these are the types of questions that they can ask as well. So that this is very particular to their situation if they weren't trying to live a life, even if it's seasonally, trying to live 6 months in one country and 6 months not. Who's not trying to do that?
Yeah, or
uh,
even 6 months in one state and 6 months in another. That
yes,
even internally within the U.S., you should have an idea of how the different states treat things. Probate. Florida does not have an estate tax. There's no estate tax if you pass away. There's a federal estate tax that we can chat about quickly, but Florida doesn't have that. But New York does, California does.
mm,
So that's something else. Even if you're staying within the U.S. And for anyone who needs a contact in another state, I have a very large network because we refer work and we, have to call people all the time. So don't hesitate to reach out and I can connect you with a couple great people and, whatever state or even country that you might be, thinking about moving to.
that's awesome. Thank you. And so to wrap up these episodes, we have rapid fire questions, which you had the first time you were on the podcast, but the questions have changed a little bit. So it'll be different for you. But before we do that, I wanted to ask if there was any last bit of information that you want to share with our audience. And then also if what's coming up for you, how can people connect with you and your business?
I think the biggest thing that we didn't touch on yet is just also noting that depending on what happens next week, we have a very unique estate tax situation right now. So right now, if you're a US citizen or permanent resident, you can give away or die with about $13 million, $13.61 million in 2024. The law says that, and that's a lot of money, and that's per spouse if you're married. The law says that at the end of 2025, if nothing changes, that's going to go down to about 7 million a person. So people
Wow.
who are high net worth are in a very unique position right now. If that does go down, use up some of your exemption, make gifts into irrevocable trusts or outright to individuals. Talk to someone who is experienced like ourselves in this area because there is a unique time period and there's a limit to what you can do because the law could sunset. Now, depending on who becomes president, they may decide to change that law. Maybe it'll go down even further. Maybe it will stay at 13 million, but that's really, really important. And we would love to connect with everyone. You can follow us on Instagram, Flourish Law Group. I'm more active on at lawyer Lauren Klein. Also, Flourish Law Group is our website. We have some good information on there. And truly, if anyone wants to connect and needs resources, whether it's financial advisors, CPAs, estate planning attorneys, and other jurisdictions, we are completely here to help with that.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So, question number one: what country or place has made the biggest impact on you?
I think Thailand. I mean, Thailand keeps coming up. I don't know. It was just such a beautiful country. The people were so beautiful. The food was amazing. The temples and the history. I just loved it. I left feeling so peaceful and happy. And I mean, it also was my honeymoon, so it was just a fun experience. But
Double
go
whammy.
back,
Yeah.
double whammy. But it was just, I loved it so much. I really did. I can't wait to go back.
I have clients in Thailand right now on their honeymoon, and you're just making me feel like, okay, they went to the right spot. It's what's so good. So number two, what is your must-have item when you're traveling? If somebody was like, you got to get out on a plane right now. What are you grabbing from your house?
Besides my passport,
Yeah,
which I would not
besides the
lose.
logical things. Yes, you're not losing your passport.
Oh man. And I would make sure that, we have our estate planning documents in a certain spot and everyone knows, and they're also in the
Very on
vault. But
brand.
besides all the practical stuff, I have to say, it's like for me right now, anything that's hydrating, whether it's my giant Stanley cup that I brought on all my recent trips. We went on an Alaskan cruise. I brought it. We went to a wedding in New York. I'm like, I need to stay hydrated. And also like face stuff, like on the plane, like I have this like eye roller that has the cream, and I'm almost 40. I feel like my skin just can't handle travel as well anymore. And I've never been like a big skincare person, but lately that's been my go-to,
I love
making
that, and
sure I
it's kind of
feel
like
good.
making the travel experience an elevated experience and feeling good while you travel.
Yes.
Literally, as you've picked up
Yes.
your water bottle, I just drank way too much coffee, and now I feel like SpongeBob when he's dehydrated. I'm like, I need to drink my water. So thank
It's
you for
me
reminding
like
me to
all
drink.
day.
Thank you for reminding me to drink water. And then number three, I believe this was a question last time, but I'm interested to see if it's changed in the last year. What is the biggest life lesson you've learned while traveling?
Trying to think what I said last time. I feel like I'm going to say the same thing. I think it's just going with the flow. It's no,
Yeah.
and which, is a different story with kids as opposed to traveling without kids. But just if your flight is delayed, if your hotel room isn't ready, if something doesn't go to plan, just going with the flow. Just enjoy the moment, because you're not going to remember that stressful part. You're going to remember the beautiful memories and the experiences. So just go with the flow. I think that's what I said last time too, but it's true. It really is true.
And if you have your estate plan in place, you can go with the flow because you know you're covered. So it all works
That's
together.
right. That was nicely done. Nicely
Just
done.
wrap it up in a shiny little bow. I love it. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today, for sharing with the community again. This is something that, I feel like I need to create a little PDF checklist. This was perfect. And I'm so grateful for your time. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for having me again. This was a blast.
All right, that was such a good episode. Short and sweet, to the point. She had that checklist on point. I loved how simple she made the process feel, although there's a lot to consider. I think the main takeaway for me is just making sure that I have my professional team on point. All of this is supposed to help you start to create your checklist, start to build your professional team so that you feel supported, so that you have your financial buckets in place, so that you know that no matter what happens, that you're covering yourself in that situation, especially if you have a partner involved, kids involved, if you have family back in the US that might need support if they're getting older. All of these things are to be considered as you embark on this new journey. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Transform with Travel podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode of inspiration, adventure, and exploration. If you felt inspired by this episode, please rate and review in whatever streaming app you're listening from. This allows us to spread the word even more and continue to serve up weekly doses of adventure. As always, we'd love if you could share the episode with someone in your life who you think will benefit from this conversation. Thanks so much for listening. This is your reminder to get out there and keep on exploring.